some scratching at my neck won't leave me alone. Will you see yourself back in the sun? The light it stings while the night it sings to me. And I'm normal how a story I can't tell, but they'll see the gift they've given to me. I could step aside, I could end this life, but this disease, it won't release, it won't be cured by the night. I guess I'm never coming back. I'm owning on.
Welcome back, everyone, to the St. By Night Twitch channel, where we play St. Petersburg By Night, a massive multiplayer 5th edition chronicle set in the world of darkness, including Vampire the Masquerade, including Hunter the Reckoning, including Werewolf the Apocalypse, all set in St. Petersburg, Florida. My name is Kent, also known as Misha Kent, and I am the lead storyteller of St. Pete by Night. But tonight, this is After Dark. This is our behind-the-scenes look into everything that makes St. Pete by Night the marvelous, magnificent, wonderful community and game and stream that it is. This is where we talk to amazing members of our community that make the game happen, including storytellers, including players, including webmaster wizards, of which, like the Highlander, there can be only one, and we are lucky enough to be joined by that one tonight. Tonight we are talking to Kyrie the Webmaster Wizard. There you get to see a little blurb about Kyrie, and we're going to, jump into a lot of the details of what we see here. But this is just a small synopsis of the amazing things that make Kyrie such an important part of this community. And though I could go on forever, let's allow Kyrie himself to introduce himself. Go ahead.
Howdy, folks. Yes, I'm Kyrie. If I'm wearing the number 2 headband, that's scary because I think that everybody's coming after me then. Yeah. So I do my best to provide the tools necessary for the storytellers and the players, build out the website, and actually spend a lot of my time playing more than anything else. So absolutely love this community and love being here.
Well, I have so much that I want to talk about with you. So much, in fact, that I doubt we can probably fit it all into one single conversation. But I'm going to do my absolute best to try and cover as much of it as humanly possible. As a reminder to everybody who is watching along live on Twitch today, After Dark allows for questions and answers coming from the community, coming from the viewers. So if you have any questions that you'd like me to ask Kyrie at any given time, please feel free to just throw them into the chat, and I will bring them up when I can find a space in my fangirling to do so. So, Kyrie, let's start kind of in a neutral spot before we get into the St. Pete stuff, before we get into the webmaster wizardry that you've done for our amazing community. Let's start simply with, how did you get into TTRPGs? Where did you first kind of encounter and discover TTRPGs, and what game was it? How did you make your entrance into this kind of overall hobby, obsession, lifestyle that we all adore so much?
So yeah, my gateway drug was different from a lot of folks. It was actually Fasacorp, if anyone's old enough to remember them. BattleTech was my absolute favorite thing when I was a kid. And it was in the early 90s, I think, they came out with a supplement called MechWarrior. And
Okay.
MechWarrior was the tabletop RPG version of BattleTech, where you actually got to play the characters who were piloting the vehicles and whatnot. And I completely fell in love with MechWarrior. I thought it was the greatest thing since sliced bread. And I didn't know anything else pretty much about any other game system before that. But I started digging into TTRPGs, and Friends of mine at the time started digging into them, and then we ran into Shadowrun, we ran into Earth Dawn, again, both FASA products, and started branching out from there. And it was not until much later that I started to run into D&D, and then it wasn't until I think four years later that I actually ran into Vampire.
It's funny
Um,
because I think the first system that I ran into, and this is going to be very, very weird, was the Men in Black system. I think
mhm.
that's the first like book I picked up of a TTRPG. Even though I played a lot of board games that were very similar to TTRPGs. Like I'm dying because I can't remember the name of it right now. But do you know where you'd construct the dungeon and you'd have the minis and you'd play it like it was a board game, but also
Yep.
it was kind of like a TTRPG at the same time. So yeah, it was interesting to kind of take that route in since so many people have D&D, primarily as their first point of entry. So that's very cool that you kind of came in through a relatively, I would assume, unknown game, especially to modern gamers, and that's how you found your way in. So what was your first campaign like? What was your first kind of game like? And who did you play with? Like, who were you kind of getting along with?
So yeah, Mech Warrior, the very first thing I did was focus on the Solaris 7 home world, which was the home world where all the arena battles happen, right? So you have all these stables of mech warriors who are basically fighting in a big coliseum to see who's the best. And of course, at the time, and I didn't realize how quickly this would become a pattern, nobody wanted to be the one who actually was the GM. And so I was like, okay, I'll do it. I'll be the GM. And that is how my forever GMness started. Everything we picked up after that, I think you were describing like Hero Quest there. We picked that
Hero
up one
Quest.
year, and who needs to run Hero Quest? Well, you ran the Mech Warrior thing, so you run the Hero Quest, right? We got the Dragon Quest thing. Oh, you run the Dragon Quest, right? Like, and so yeah, it started like that. It pretty much been like that for my entire life. That's why I like St. Pete. I get a chance to actually play and not have to worry about moving things behind the scenes.
So how do you feel about kind of being saddled with that role, with that position? Like I have a very similar story of it's hard to find people to run games and there's a lot of work that comes with it and a lot of responsibility. And eventually those of us who have a knack for it or any kind of interest in it just kind of pick it up and go. And then we're stuck with it forever. But how did you get kind of caught up? Like, how did you feel about getting caught up into that role, and is it a role that you enjoy? Is it one that you prefer, or is it something that you'd rather like are would prefer to pass off to somebody else?
Yeah, in the beginning, I think I had a struggle really, being the one who was always running stuff because it seemed like I was doing more work than everybody else when it came to sessions and whatnot. And there was a lot of conflicts that happened with players about that over the years. And then I realized that, oh, hey, wait a minute, maybe I can start pushing some of this work off onto some of my players and making them do some of the lifting. And then it started to get a little bit more interesting, and then I kind of fell into a rhythm with it where I was very happy with how things were running. It was a very comfortable place to be, and then it got at one point a little bit too comfortable, and I burned out pretty badly. And I told my players at the time, I was like, "Look, I'm not running games anymore, ever. I'm putting the books away." I actually ended up getting rid of all of my World of Darkness books I had at the time. Digitized everything and sold everything else to half price books. Was like, I'm done. Um, and then it was maybe another 4 years later, V5 came out, and I happened to be at PAX Unplugged when they were showcasing the V5 playtest, and I was like, I got time. I'm gonna go check it out. And I went and checked it out, and they ran through the scenario, and I was so infuriated by the end of the scenario at how badly it was run that I downloaded the scenario myself. I downloaded the rule book that they gave me a link to, and I was like, I am running this when I get home. Like, I'm finding
Yeah.
some friends and I am gonna run this and I am gonna do it right because this looks like an amazing system. And kind of jump started me back into running again.
Well, and that's something that I've found about you as a person is you don't take less than you deserve, honestly. Like you're the person who will take something and be like, this could be better, and you will retool it and rework it and kind of take the impetus on yourself to be like, I'm going to make this what I think this should be or what I think this could be, and you're constantly improving on things. And we'll get into talking about the dice bot in a little bit here, which is one of the coolest features that we have on St. Pete by Night because of you. But you mentioned the World of Darkness. What was your first exposure to the World of Darkness, and how did you kind of get introduced to it? Because it has, like, it was really big in the 90s
Yeah.
and early aughts, but it is still what I would consider to be a very cult role-playing game. Like it has a underground following. It's never reached a level like a D&D or, you know, even like a Pathfinder. It's kind of always been one that's been below the surface that people hear about, but they never, it's not in your face like a lot of, you know, some other systems could be. So what was your first kind of introduction to the World of Darkness, and how did you encounter it?
Yeah, so it was actually kind of completely by accident. I'd showed up at the local game store expecting to play in a Magic tournament because I was actually really big into Magic at the time too. And the tournament didn't materialize because only three of us showed up, and they were paying prizes to the top three, and they weren't just gonna give out prizes just because we were there. You know, store makes its own rules when it comes to that. And there was a table of vampire players there who two of their players had canceled. And they were like, "Hey, we can't run this. Do y'all want to come in here and just kind of sit in and play some pre-gens?" And I was like, "Yeah, sure. I'm not doing anything else. I don't want to go home. I was young, and you know, don't want to be in my parents' house. Of course,
Right.
who wants to do that?" And so I sat down. They gave me this Bruja Anarch who was a hacker of some kind. And my first experience of the game was our Anarch hideout being kicked in by the Camarilla. Uh, and so the Camarilla comes in, and these vampires obviously way outclass us, completely outclass us, and we end up having to run for it. After being prompted by the storyteller at the time that, hey, you know, you guys can run. That's a thing you can do, because previous to that, who runs from encounters? Nobody runs from encounters, right? And so that was my first experience. The Ventru hit squad, along with a La Sombra at that point. I'm not really sure what the story was because I was only there for the one game, coming in, kicking in the doors of the Anarchs.
I think that's kind of one of the hardest lessons that has been for players to learn, especially players who come from like a D&D style background where it's like, well, obviously the solution to most issues is just fighting them and beating them and winning. And then moving on to the next room of the dungeon or whatever the case may be. And World of Darkness, you know, along with other games that have come since, like Call of Cthulhu and stuff like that, it, that's a hard lesson for people, that it's like, well, maybe that's not the best option. And
Yeah.
that's kind of, especially when you're playing with more experienced storytellers and people who know the World of Darkness, it's like, yeah, you're probably not going to win that fight. You're not going to win most fights just going in through that D&D mentality. And so it can be kind of very jarring, I feel, for a lot of, you know, people who are expecting one type of game and getting a completely different kind of game. But that's one of the things I love about it. Now, circling back to Magic the Gathering, we do have a question from Waffles with Nico, which is, what kind of decks did you or do you usually play in Magic the
Oh,
Gathering?
okay. So that's definitely a did you. At some point, I realized that trying to keep up with Magic was going to be throwing money down a hole, and I couldn't afford to do that. So I think I left sometime around the end of the Urza's saga. The last thing I remember was Shard Phoenix was the crazy deck to beat. So if that tells you how long it's been since I've been involved in Magic, I think I might be dating myself there.
Oh no, I'm totally like, the last time I actively played was like Fallen Empire,
Oh,
which
that's even
was
further back.
way back when. That's gonna date the hell out of me. But I did get back into it very, very briefly with when they decided to bring in Faerun into Magic the Gathering. And I didn't even get into it to play. I got into it as a collector, being like, yeah, oh, there's a Dritz card, and
Yep.
there's,
Yep.
so that's what brought me back to it, just as a collector. And then I kind of was like, oh no, I still can't keep up, because then the Baldur's Gate set came out. Like, it's just
Yep.
they constantly were releasing more and more and more. And the stuff that you had, the stuff that you thought was powerful, like your 1/1 skeletons, are now just
Right.
not even feasible. You can
Mhm.
barely play with them. And so it was very hard to keep up with. And I just ended up putting them back in a box and shoving them into the back corner, because I knew I was never going to be able to actively play the way I used to back
Right.
in middle school.
Yeah.
Which
Yeah.
feels a long time from now.
Oh yeah, right.
From now.
But
But
then from there, I got involved in jihad. I don't know if you ever did that.
that was actually how I got exposed initially, kind of, to World of Darkness. Is first I saw the core book, didn't play right away, just picked it up and had it. And then I saw the playing cards, and I was just like, I like card games, because it was the time that I was into
Right.
Magic. It was middle school, and so I was like, yeah, I'm gonna get some of those. And then I was like, I don't know how to play this game at all. This doesn't
None of this
quite
makes
compute.
sense.
But actually, in the years since, I've ended up collecting a whole bunch of the Jihad cards and Eternal Struggle cards, because I love World of Darkness,
Yeah.
and all the things that surround it. And that being said, my next question would be for you: what about World of Darkness called to you? What about this particular setting, this system, this game was really what made you kind of keep it in your portfolio, or in your docket of games for all these years?
Yeah, it was so incredibly different from everything else that was out at the time. Like, saying that now, like, you look at a lot of the RPGs that are out now, and it's not incredibly different from those RPGs. It's not, it's a narrative RPG,
Hmm.
which there's plenty of those now. But back then, narrative RPG was not a thing. And for a large majority of the systems that were out, it was role playing, like ROLL, than it was ROLE playing. And that was really, the book was just so different in the way that it approached the game in general. And the fact that these stats were not so granular, they were abstractions, and they were designed to tell a story, or to set it up so that you could tell a story that would be satisfying to all the players at the table. And even the fact that they changed the name from game master to storyteller helped, reinforce that. And it was completely different experience, completely eye-opening, and that's the one thing that I think really hooked me over everything else.
Yeah, I love the idea of ROLE versus ROLL. I'm a theater kid. I did theater all through high school. Like, I've done a lot of community theater since, and I love the idea of creating and inhabiting a character, and the weight being put on social encounters more than physical encounters. Yes, they had mechanics for physical
Right.
encounters. They had, something that would play to that a little bit more, but they did have so much behind the social encounters. It wasn't, a single skill or a handful of skills that, if used creatively, could be helpful. It was a lot more like, here's how you can do it, and here's a whole bunch of stuff you can use to augment it. And,
Yep.
like, a
Yep.
lot of the weight of World of Darkness is behind the ROLE play versus the ROLL play. And I'm not, I played AD&D, which you had to have a math degree to be able to even comprehend. And, I went through 3.5, fourth edition, which threw everything off, fifth edition, but I love that World of Darkness kind of stayed consistent even
Right.
through the additions. Yes, they'd add some things, they'd take some things away, they'd rework a few things, but the concept of the game was so simplistic. And the handful, like the big handful of D10s, is such a powerful feeling that you
it,
just
it
don't get in other games.
it actually feels a lot like Shadowrun. If you ever play Shadowrun, that the bucket of D6s that you end up
Oh,
rolling is
it's
just ridiculous.
absolutely amazing. We have another question, and I'm having to scroll up here from Hugo Boss J, a regular here on After Dark, who asks, "Are there? Do you currently have any systems you really want to play?" And I'm going to add the preface that you have not played before, like ones you've heard of but have not actually played.
Absolutely. So, how old do you want to talk? Because I got one that's really old. I got one that's not so old. Uh,
Let's name a few then. We're not going to
okay.
limit to one. Let's go with
Um,
really old, more
okay. All
modern,
right. Right.
and go from there.
So, Cult came out back in the early 90s, like right around the same time that VTM came, that I registered the VTM was out, right? Because I think VTM was in its second edition by the time that I registered it was out. And I've always been fascinated with the lore of Cult, but I've never actually had a chance to play a game of Cult. And it seems so uh, mind-bending that I think that the closest thing I've played that could scratch that itch is actually Mage the Ascension.
Okay.
Um, but it's so much darker than Mage the Ascension is, because it's the war between angels and demons, and how they are affecting the universe and mankind. Burning Wheel is another one that I have not had a chance to get my hands on a game of, because I just never seem to be in the right place at the right time. The social combat mechanics in Burning Wheel are amazing. You can do things like say, well, I'm going to filibuster this situation, and you get bonuses for doing the filibuster, right? You can be like, well, I'm going to bring in, my beliefs into this conversation, and you get bonuses for that. And then you can do like verbal feints. The whole system for Burning Wheel looked absolutely amazing. But that's one of the more recent ones. And then honestly, the most recent one that I haven't had a chance to get my hands on or play any of is Kids on Bikes. I've heard everybody talk about how great Kids on Bikes is.
The
Uh,
Powered by the Apocalypse system in general, your Monster of the Week, your Kids on Brooms, Kids on Bikes, like all of those games, I love those games because it is so mechanics light and creativity heavy. Like it's so like, okay, here's the kind of what we're going for with these mechanics, but it really does leave it up to you and your person who's running the game. I know they have a term for it too that isn't, DM or storyteller. But those people are so like it just leaves so much flexibility, and I love that. I love to see people do things creatively, and I love to see people use their own imagination to kind of give weight and merit to things. And yeah, so the Kids on Bikes, I definitely want to play that one. I've played Monster of the Week, and I have the books for Kids on Bikes and Kids on Brooms, but I have not had a chance to play them yet. But they seem phenomenal.
so yeah, I didn't know that was Powered by the Apocalypse, because I know when Cult was re-released, it was re-released under Powered by the Apocalypse.
Right.
So I'm not sure now. I kind of want to play the old Cult and the new Cult to see the differences between the two.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. But yeah, it's just a wonderful system, and they've added a whole bunch of settings to it, and I think it is so cool that they've come up with so many creative offshoots, and that it's doing so well. I mean, this is again a gaming company and system that doesn't have the backing of a D&D. It doesn't even have the backing of a World of Darkness, but it's still managing to hang in there, and I'm glad to see such variety happening in the kind of gaming stratosphere, and
Right,
that you don't have to dig too deep to find it anymore.
right.
It's much more accessible with social media and with communities like St. Pete by Night. That being said, let's get into St. Pete by Night. How did you find out about this community, and what kind of encouraged you to give it a shot and try it?
So I found out about the community through Nori. She was playing Naomi at the time. She was talking about how she had joined this server, and she was playing this character because she was really jonesing for a vampire game. And I was like, I don't know how I feel about running one. It's a whole lot of work, blah blah blah. And so she ended up joining St. Pete. She would tell me about St. Pete like every week. She'd be telling me about St. Pete, and I was always like, not sure, not sure. Nah, not for me. Nah, it doesn't sound like it's for me, because it. I just wasn't sure that this was something that I wanted to spend my time on. And it was right around December a couple of years ago at this point. A year ago at this point. I don't know. Time is a weird soup, right?
Yeah, it
Um,
is. I can't believe it's February, so or 2024 for that matter. I'm still stuck in like 2015,
right,
16. So
right.
yeah. Um,
Yeah, so I decided, you know what? I want to make a character. I'm going to make a character to play opposite of Naomi, because that's one thing that Nori and I are notorious for doing in any games that we play in. We always play characters who, for some reason, are complete foils to each other. And we did not intend for that to happen. I just wanted to play on the other side of the server from her so I could see what the other side was like, the Anarchs, right? And honestly, I never had been in a truly Anarch game that didn't start with the Ventru kicking in your haven. So
as
uh,
they do.
right. And so I had this concept that's been rolling around my head since the beginning, since I read about Thomas Hines in the Chicago by Night book. I had this concept that was kicking around in my head, and that's where Ian came from. Decided to bring him in, and I had a blast. And over the course of several months, ended up being the opposite of Naomi, which totally not intended. But like I said, that's Nori and I. If we don't actually go in creating characters who are going to be cooperative to each other, they're always going to be diametrically opposed.
Well, yeah, and Nori, and for context, Nori is Kyrie's wife and partner, and also just a huge member of the community, part of the mod team, just absolutely phenomenal. She was playing a Bruja at the time, and you were playing
Yep.
a Ventru, which was, again, the
Right.
perfect, for
Right.
those who know the lore, diametric opposites in their everything. But Ian Farrow, your first character, who now known as Baron Ian Farrow,
Right.
as of the revamp, was one of the most clever and well played Ventru, I think, in the game in its entirety. Like, you understood what it was to be a Ventru, but you added the challenge to yourself of being an Anarch Ventru, which is kind of oppositional in the clan within itself, because
Right.
the Venture believe in order, they believe in leadership, they believe in ruling everything, and they definitely believe in the Camarilla. And so to play, a Ventru in the Anarchs and not to immediately seize power, which was never, I think, his original intent. It was kind of like one of those, he just worked his way into it. But talk a little bit more about the creative process behind Ian Farrow, and what the experience was like playing him in the actual game.
Yeah, so yeah, you're right. The intent was never to actually seize power, never to actually take power. In fact, my whole intent with Ian was to come in and play him and have him be given power, just because he is Ventru, and that is the way Ventru are. Which it was very satisfying to actually play through that and see that happen. But yeah, like I said, the character concept came from way back reading about Thomas Hines, who, if you know the lore, is the child of Loden, who went Anarch,
Yep.
and has been kept around, not really blood hunted, because he is a child of Loden. Loden's big about family, but also because he's useful to Loden. And then the idea was that Ian was of that bloodline of Anarch Ventrue, who did come from Loden. And that was one thing that I enjoyed trying to keep secret throughout the game, because technically him being from that bloodline, he's blood hunted. That was very interesting, a lot of fun. Um, but then coming in and knowing that there's a target painted on my back was the reason that I really wanted to play him, because the target's painted not only from the Anarch side, but it's also painted from the Camarilla side. I wanted to certainly challenge myself to see, okay, can I navigate this? Like, I could write this story as a storyteller, yeah, no problem. But can I navigate this as a player with other storytellers and see how well I can put my own skills to the test?
So, what was your first impressions joining this server and this style of play? Because I know, for especially in our first iteration, it was a very kind of unusual way to play the game. Obviously, in the way that the rules are written, in the way that the game kind of is formed, it's under an intention of like a small party table. And
Right.
yes, people have, adopted it to LARPs and other kind of ways of play, but this was, at least for me, the first time I'd encountered anything in this fashion, in the way we were doing it. So what were kind of your first impressions of it, and how did you find yourself having to adapt your typical play style to play in this environment?
Yeah, it was honestly to me absolute chaos. I did not understand how any of the storytellers or the mods were keeping any of this together, and I was like, "This looks like it could burst at the seams at any moment," but looks kind of like fun after I started playing, and I had a blast. The one thing that I really had to do was come into scenes when I set them up with an objective, and then make sure that I left the scene with an objective. That was one thing that I found with the last iteration that really made it so that I could drive my character forward. As long as I came in with a goal to accomplish and I left with another goal to accomplish, then I could carry my character's story throughout all of these different scenes. And the notes part, I think, was probably the most frustrating of all of it because number one, I hate taking notes.
Me too.
Uh,
I
and
was a
and no,
bastard for making people do it because I know if it were asked of me, I just wouldn't. I'd be like, nope, too much work. Sorry.
yep, I totally struggled with it too. I was like, oh, I got to take notes. I don't think I'm gonna last long. But then I hit upon the idea of turning Ian's notes into letters to his sire.
Yep.
And so for me, it was actually writing them in game and recapping to his sire, who he did not know if the sire was alive or dead, and intended to give him this bundle of letters whenever he found him, so he could catch him up on everything that has happened in the intervening years. But that was turning them into that made the notes way more palatable for me. And I was like, okay, I think I can handle this because I'm writing fiction at the same time that I'm playing fiction, and it really allowed me to stretch the storyteller part when I was writing that out.
Well, and I think that for context, for anybody who didn't have the privilege or punishment of playing in the first iteration, it was a very, very different way of playing the game. We had an open world concept, very
Yeah,
LARP, style, where you would seek out your own stories while there were stories going on, and you could determine your level of involvement in said stories. But a lot of it was based off of open RP and people kind of playing on their own and choosing scenes. And so I totally love that you were like, I have an objective. If I'm showing up, if I'm taking the time, I have something that I'm trying to accomplish, and I'm going to walk away with something that I did
yep,
accomplish or something that I learned. And I think, especially for newer players who joined the game, they didn't quite have that experience or that play style. They would just go just to go, and it was a very addictive concept that the game was open 24 hours a day, 7
right,
days a week, that there were people playing and you could just hop into scenes and be a part of stuff. And they got really swept up in that. And I think that ended up being kind of the downfall of a lot of characters, that it ended up being problematic for a lot of characters, that they didn't come in with that very kindred mindset of like, if I'm going to even bother to interact with
right,
anyone, if I'm going to go out in public, if I'm going to do anything that isn't feeding and hunting, I need to be doing it for a reason.
yeah,
And I never, very few people executed it really as well as Ian did. Ian always really seemed very business focused, which also, lended credence to the Ventru in him
right,
of like, I'm here to do business. I'm not here just to bullshit and just to hang out and just to, be seen. I'm here for a reason. I'm going to get something done. If I get a little bit of extra out of this and walk away with a little bit more, great. But at the very minimum, I have an objective every single time I enter into the game or the scene. And so, what kind of advice would you give to newer players to World of Darkness or newer players to Vampire the Masquerade or even St. Pete by Night about kind of that style of play and that kind of concept of play?
Yeah, I think probably the best advice I can give, and I forget which book this is in. It's in one of the many source books that I've read, and it was in relation to how the Camarilla deals with the Sabbat incursions, right? And it was, don't think like kind, think like kindred, right? Don't think about, your emotions and what your character's feeling. Like your character is mostly interested in blood, right? That's going to be the number one. Follow the blood.
Right.
Follow that'll help your character. Your character also has an ambition. Always focus on the ambition, because that is your character's drive. That is what your character is trying to get done. That is the thing that could make them want to retire. And then anything that your character is doing should be in service towards one of those things. It doesn't have to look that way, and you can hide it that you're not looking that way. Like a lot of Ian's relationships didn't appear to be transactional, but to him, they were all transactional. He was getting something and trying to give as little as possible every time. So that's one way to focus on how you are no longer human and more of a monster, more of a beast without being too on the nose.
Right, and in a way, I think that people kind of ignore the fact that you're still a predator.
Right.
Predator, your predator instincts aren't just for hunting and getting blood. They're in your social interactions. They're in your overall motivations, your ambitions, your desires. Like everything is about hunting something,
Yeah.
whether it's hunting power, whether it's hunting influence, whether it's hunting, whatever the case may be, you are trying to hoard and gather and hunt down these aspects. And yes, you do through a variety of ways based off of your clan, based off of your character build, but you are by your very nature a hunter. And on the opposite side of that, you're also struggling to hold on to your humanity, which is going to allow you to stay a predator and a hunter for a longer period of time. Because if
Right.
you just go full in on the predator side of things, you're going to quickly succumb to humanity loss, and you're going to quickly be taken over by the slobbering,
Yep.
ravenous beast inside of you. So it is a tenuous balance, but your primary motivation, your primary focus is hunting, is being a predator in your encounters, in your interactions, even within your own coterie, is kind of
Hmm.
like,
Hmm.
what am I getting out of any interaction that I'm going into? I'm not just giving, because giving is losing, giving is becoming
Yep.
prey. You are getting something out of it. So Ian was a particularly interesting character because he had a vast knowledge of kindred history. He was very, very well versed, like yourself, in the lore and the history of kindred. But he had a very, I say socialist just because it's, I think, most translatable to people by what I
Yeah.
mean when I say that. But he had a very kind of triumvirate trinity style thought process of like, we are a community. I'm not just the leader and you are all the subordinates, even though sometimes he could manipulate that a little bit. He did have this kind of idea of what he expected kindred society to be. And what made you decide to go down that path, especially as a Ventru? And then what was your thought process when it came to entering into a city where it was kind of being built like that, even within the Camarilla under Isabel's dream? Like, let's talk through that.
Yeah, yeah. So Ian, originally the concept with him was he's an anarch agitator who would spend time in, several anarch baronies, learning how anarchs operate, how anarchs work, and then had taken all of the knowledge that he'd gathered about anarchs and Camarilla and put that into use, infiltrating Camarilla domains, basically digging in and slowly finding people who he could speak to and change their minds over time. Which is why when I was trying to figure out where he came from before St. Pete, Miami seemed to be a perfect fit for him, especially
Yes.
since it had recently flipped. And so I'd written that recent flip into his backstory, that he was, one of those voices that helped push that to happen. And his idea when I was bringing him to St. Pete was first thing you do is you dig in, being Ventru, right? You dig in like a tick. You have fortitude. No one will be able to remove you. And then once no one can remove you because you are physically immovable and you are socially immovable and mentally immovable, then you just agitate, 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 agitate in ways that no one can really tell that it's you. And slowly the anarch sentiment takes over the city. Little did I know, after building all this and having this character who believed that Constantinople was the ideal, little did I know that, oh, well, this city is based on Constantinople. Like literally, one of the bloodline of Michael is the prince, and she was working on rebuilding the dream. And so having my character confronted with, oh, holy shit, where did this come from? Why did no one ever tell me about this? Like this is amazing. This is the place to actually build the thing that he wanted. Which is why his mindset changed from, okay, I need to agitate and get people at each other's throats, to, oh no, we all got to work together here. Like this is the place. This is where we make the stand. We've got a Camarilla, as he was calling him in the last iteration, the Camino, Camarilla in name only. Um,
Not wrong.
we've got the Camino who are willing to say they are Camarilla adjacent enough to not have the ivory tower come bust us up. And we can form this relationship. This is the seed for something that could be, change inside the Camarilla and outside the Camarilla, because he has a lot of opinions about why the Camarilla were bad and why the Anarch Barons are just worthless,
Yeah.
especially out on the West Coast.
Well, and that's the thing too, is like the concept in its very nature, and I think that's one of the things that makes it most interesting, is broken. Like the concept of the Camarilla is broken. The concept of the Anarchs is broken. They're very they're clinging to these ideals that are very not practical, not going to live. Like with the modernization of society, of technology, of all these things, the ideals of the Camarilla are crumbling, because they had a very leadership forever, the elders will lead, then the beckoning happens and it's like, well, maybe the elders won't lead. Oh shit. And all these aspects that they threw in, especially in 5th edition, have made it that they're both kind of unsustainable in the long term. And the Sabbat, of course, was always unsustainable. They had one ideal, one goal. They were going to go to that goal as hard as they could. And in a lot of ways, they succeeded, kind of. They kind of got what they wanted, kind of.
Yeah.
So it was like, how are we going to modernize this? How are we going to give this a fresh perspective? And I had originally intended for it to be a true Camarilla city, but through play and through developing Isabel, that kind of shifted into like, well, how can it be, how can it be kind of refreshed and unusual? And so the interactions between Isabel and Ian were some of my favorite, for sure, because they seemed like two sides of the same coin, that they were the same person put in two different situations. One deciding the Anarch side was the way to go. The other deciding the Camarilla side was the way to go, because the Camarilla provided certain stability, certain protections, and certain enforcement. However, what she did against Tampa was an outright act of rebellion that should have probably gotten her killed, and everyone who went with her killed. But that was the drama of it, and that was kind of the fun of the first season or two, several seasons of the iteration. And then it was like, okay, we got what we were looking for in Praxis. Now what? So it was changing from the inside, like you said, versus just outright opposing it and then trying to stir some stuff up to create a scenario where you could build it. So a question from Truck, and I'm not going to read the entire paragraph that he gave me, but he basically said, what goes into your thought process of the creation of characters? Like, do you have a formula that you use to create your characters, or do you is it just kind of like off the brain, kind of like just works its way out and then kind of takes shape and becomes magic? Or do you really put a lot of thought process into planning, into building those types of characters?
So yeah, I do have a process when it comes to building characters, and I'm gonna screw this up because I'm not actively doing it, and I don't have my notes in front of me. I've actually got it. It's something that I've had to work out for coming up with storyteller characters and making storyteller characters believable. So I also use it and apply it to my own player characters. But the first thing that a character needs is need. They need something. They might not really know what that need is. They might not really understand what that need is, or they might. They might need something like fame. They might need something like adoration. They might need something like money. They might need something like to be self-actualized. Whatever that thing is, they need it. And then they need, in order to continue to build them, you need an impediment. There's a reason that they don't have this thing right now. There's a reason that they're not super famous. There's a reason they're not rich. There's a reason that they don't have their dream built, right? There's a reason they're not running a kindred society. Like something is stopping them from that. So there's an impediment they have to get over. And then hold on, what's the third one? Hopefully the third one comes to me, but those are the two most those are the two most important. And I was just doing this the other day, and I'm sad that I'm not looking at my notes. But then they need a drive, right? They need a reason to continue to do stuff. While you might have a need, and there might be something in the way, there's got to be something that makes them want to keep fighting past whatever that thing is. And there's the once you can kind of build those three things out, and there's the fourth one, and I can't remember what it is. I feel very chagrined about that right now. Um, but once you build those out, then you start to flesh out the character beyond that. Like it starts to tell you more about the character. It starts to tell you more about who they are, where they came from, and then you start to think about, okay, so what type of situation would build a person like this? What would they have to go through in order to want this kind of thing? Like what was their life? And if they want fame, what was their life like where that's the thing that they really wanted, right?
Right.
And then you start to build further and further. And honestly, especially when it comes to vampire, build the mortal before you build the vampire.
I have said this since we
Yes,
started this server. I've said start with a human, and then your
right.
storyteller, your fellow players, your we will make them into a vampire. We will attune them and twist them into a vampire. Don't start with a discipline. Don't start with a clan in mind. Don't start with anything like that. Start simply with a mortal, because you might discover something about that mortal that will make you end up picking a clan that isn't necessarily one you'd normally go towards, or
Right.
might have you
Right.
experimenting with something, and your storyteller can help lead you to that. Say like, okay, what you said you love Ventru, but what you've really built here is a ministry or is a Banu Hakim, and like let's look into that now, keeping your concept the way it is. I feel like people try to shove a square peg into a circle hole, and it doesn't work. They're just so set on playing something specific, whether they want a specific discipline or they want a specific clan, that they end up kind of confusing it, or the common over popular, I'm going to play the opposite of the clan, I'm going to play the unusual black sheep, not realizing that, well, yes, that's a good concept, but that's very rare in the
Right.
lore, very rare in the way the system was built. The system was built that they, and this sounds toxic and unhealthy, but that they groom and look for a specific type of person before they embrace them. They're not going to
Especially
embrace
the
them
Ventrue.
willy nilly.
Especially the
Adventure,
Ventrue.
yeah, and in the Toreador, you know, they
Mm,
they look for certain qualities, and not having those qualities is going to pretty much throw you out of the running for being embraced by that clan. They're not going to embrace you, and maybe one rebellious kid goes off and does something stupid, but when you have an entire city of unusual off type characters, it's problematic in its own right. It doesn't work. You need to
right.
have some people, or a majority of people, who follow a certain mold for it to fit within the setting, within the, you know, the system as it is. Um, that being said, what's your
And I
favorite?
just remembered,
Oh
I
yeah,
just
go ahead.
remembered what the
Go
fourth
ahead.
one was. The fourth one is a hook. You need something that happened to them last Thursday. And I say last Thursday, meaning like very recently. Like you need something that is driving them to action right now.
Yeah.
Like and it has to be something dramatic, right? Like in the case of Last Thursday vampires, they were turned into a vampire last Thursday. In the case of vampires who have already existed, something happened to them last Thursday that is super important. Like in the case of Ian, last Thursday he moved to St. Pete. Like that's the brand new thing, and so he has to get the lay of the land. Otherwise, as a vampire, he's just going to get steamrolled by the
Right.
vampires who are already here. So that gives him a reason to get in there immediately and start doing stuff.
Right. So your way of building characters, did you have that? Have you used that for a long time? Because it's funny to me, that's what 5th edition helped bring to Vampire and the World of Darkness. Funny enough,
Yes.
with ambition and desire, it's like, what's your long-term goal and what are the steps you're going to take towards achieving that goal? So it's very interesting that you mentioned it that way. So have you been using that kind of philosophy or that mindset for a while of what's a need and what's impeding that need? Or is that something that you kind of discovered through this new rendition?
Yeah, I actually started using it for storyteller characters. I started using it for characters in D&D even, like trying to make them more real so that when players ran across them, those characters wanted something. And potentially, if the players say the right words or do the right things and feed into what that character wants, oh, absolutely, I'm going to help. Um, and those taking that and then seeing it in 5th edition was absolutely mind-blowing because I couldn't stop talking about how awesome 5th edition Vampire was with the way the characters creation goes, the way they tell you to do the mortal first. If you step through all of it, it's all right there. And I was just like, this is what they needed back in 2nd edition. The
Yes.
nature and demeanor stuff was garbage. Like this is what they needed. They needed this ambition and desire stuff. Like this was really good.
I think there's a way they could have balanced both. I did like nature and demeanor because it was like, are you what you present to other people? That's how I viewed nature
Yes.
and demeanor. Like,
Right.
what are you beneath the surface and what are you presenting to other people? Which I still think has value. I
It
still
does.
think, but they don't really emphasize that so much in 5th edition as they did in the older editions.
Right.
And so I still like people to think of a nature and demeanor, regardless of if you're going to use it on a character sheet, regardless of if there's any mechanical benefits or whatever to it. I think like you should still have that kind of philosophy that you aren't what you say you are.
Right.
I think that's still a really important thing to have in the character creation process and in the fleshing out of a character is what do you present and what are you really?
Or
Um,
if you are, that you are very transparent a character, right? Like you're just a naturally transparent person and you're not trying to pretend like you're something else, which
100%, which is a
which
totally
could
legitimate
yeah.
character type. But I think a lot of people are drawn to the idea of I'm not who I say I am, or I'm presenting something different, but really I have my own thoughts and machinations.
Hmm.
And so
Hmm.
it does create a variety. It does create a diversity that isn't just okay. What clan are you? Okay, you're gonna or what class are you in terms of D&D? Like, oh, you're a barbarian. Okay, you're going to be a barbarian. You're going to hit most of the check
Yep.
boxes of what you
Yep.
expect from a barbarian, or you're going to hit most of the check boxes of what you expect from a Ventru. There's even a deeper level to that really makes you think of the ROLE of the
Hmm.
character versus the ROLL. So I do wish they'd bring that back. I do think it would be a good, worthwhile addition. But I love that we can still use it, obviously.
Right.
But so to ask another question from the chat, Jay asks, "What's your favorite clan?"
Oh, Venture, 100%. Like
Uh,
every time I've ever read anything vampire, it's always been the Venture I've gravitated towards. Any of those personality tests that existed way back when the internet was full of those in the little vampire community, always registered me as Ventru. As Ventru is, they run everything. How can you not want to be a Ventru?
It's true. They have the power. They wear the crown.
Right.
Like, yes, there are other things like the Lasombra who are the kind of power behind the throne, or like the effectively Sabbat or Anarch version of the Ventru. And then you
I
have the
love Sabat
Malkavians who
Ventru. I
Yeah.
love Sabbat Venture. Like, if we're talking a Sabbat game, then I'm probably still going to play Ventrue, but I get to play a Crusader Ventrue at that point, and that's a whole lot of fun.
Oh, absolutely. So we're all over the place as we always are on After Dark. So I'm going
Sure.
to take you back to your first Vampire the Masquerade campaign chronicle that you were a part of. What did you play? And kind of walk me through. Did you run it? Did you have to just start out by running it, or did you actually get to be a player first? What did you play? And just talk a little bit about that experience as opposed to what you've learned since then. Of
Sure, sure. I started out by running, of course, because
course.
that's no one wanted to run, so I'm okay. I'm the one who's going to pick it up.
Yep.
And I was really fascinated at the time with the interplay between the Camarilla and the Sabbat, and the fact that the Sabbat were so dogmatically minded about we have to destroy these antediluvians because they are going to come back and eat us all. And we can't afford to treat them we can't afford to treat them with kid gloves. We got to take all the humanity off in order to deal with these monsters because these monsters don't even know what human is anymore. They probably never knew what human was at this point. And then having the players play Camarilla characters who are trying to navigate the fact that they are learning about these, basically, as far as they're concerned, holy warriors fighting this holy war, and that they might be right about this antediluvian threat, and having these younger Camarilla characters learning this, and then potentially taking that to their elders, and their elders saying, "You don't need to worry about any of that.
Yeah,
That's not
it's
something
just
you
a
should be
myth.
looking
It doesn't
into. It's totally
exist.
right. Like none of this is real." And that was really the basis for the game, was the fact that they are finding this Sabbat pack who is not as burn down the Camarilla as they expect them to be, because they are narrowly focused on trying to find this one elder
Right.
and take out this one elder. And the interaction between that was planned to be really cool and have a great social and mental scenes and whatnot, but at the time I didn't have players who were interested in the social and mental scenes. They wanted the twin Ruger Redhawks with laser sights, and they wanted the mirror plated trench coats that protected them from all sorts of stuff, and they just wanted to go off in the streets on drive-bys. And it was kind of like, well, that's what y'all want to do, that's what we're gonna do.
Feel like I'm reading some of the channels on the server right now as you're speaking, with people talking about varieties of weapons they're gonna get. And I'm like, guys, it's not that complicated. Okay, the game does not have mechanics for all these crazy weapons you're coming up with and crazy concepts you're coming up with. Like it's not that serious, y'all. You got a rifle or you got a pistol, like or a shotgun. What? Just let's
Yep.
call it that.
Yep. I don't know
Um,
how many times I had to answer the question, can I conceal a katana in my trench coat? It
yep.
was the 90s. Highlander was really popular. Like,
And Blade. Don't forget Blade.
oh, absolutely. And Blade. Yeah. But that one, I can say unequivocally was a disaster. And it was a disaster because I had different expectations than my players did. My players wanted to play a different game than I wanted to tell. And then after that, I ended up running a Hunters Hunted game. And that's back when Hunters was literally that tiny little thin, like Hunters Hunted pamphlet, maybe, is all you had. And that, I think, was one of the coolest Chronicles I've ever run. The players all played Hunters, and it was amazing because we only ran it for like 5 sessions, but they all came together every session, and it just had that feel where, when you're playing and everyone gets into their character
Mhm.
and they're just gelling and just bouncing off of each other. And we had the one character who they realized had an arsenal, and they were like, "Wait, you have an arsenal?" And the character was like, "Well, yeah." And then, like, we're able to, like, gear up to fight the vampire, and then they had the one character who actually knew stuff about vampires, and it all came together so perfectly at the very end. And that game still, I kind of get chills thinking about that one, because that was one of the first times that I ran a campaign, and I was like, this is how it's supposed to go. This is how it's supposed to feel.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, another kind of out of left field question. What do you think about the evolution of the World of Darkness since you first encountered it? Like, I keep telling people you could get a doctorate in World of Darkness lore alone. Like, it's absolutely insane, especially when you
Yeah,
added more splats and more,
yeah.
settings and all the By Night books and everything like that. What do you think about the evolution and the way they're steering the game? Because I know there's, a a pretty large few who broke off and did 20th anniversary and are like, we don't want anything to do with what 5th edition is doing. There's obviously the edition wars, all that kind of stuff.
Hmm.
But what do you think about how the game has evolved, how the story has evolved, the lore has evolved, and the direction they seem to be steering things in?
I think for the most part, it's back in a good direction. I personally I can't stand the Second Inquisition. I need more of a reason other than because Society of Leopold that these hunters have been able to become so prolific and so powerful so quickly. And I get it, they got tech and whatnot, but at the same time, there's vampires who've come up with the same tech and at the same time with the tech. So I still can't let that be in my mind, that's still not a reason for the Second Inquisition to be better, right? So that's the one I think major sticking point that I still have with fifth edition is like, you gotta tell me better than you already have about why they're so powerful. Now, if you tell me that there's like some supernatural force behind them who's actually, feeding them this stuff, ShrekNet was an inside job, then absolutely, I absolutely believe it. But like I'm sitting here, I'm looking at Beckett's Jihad Diary on my deck or on my desk here, and the lore between the shift from V20 to V5, I think was handled well. There's just a few things that just still don't quite gel with me.
And what's your favorite piece of lore? Just in the
Oh,
entirety of it. Like whether it could be the entire Chicago saga, including the War of Chicago, like if it's London and Mithras, if it's even if it's something a little more obscure like the Red Question, which I know you were really into when you first
yeah,
started
yep.
Kyrie. What is your favorite piece of lore? And kind of give a little bit of context to those who are watching who aren't as lore heavy as you and I are as to what it is.
Oh man. Okay, so the Chicago setting, I think, is my favorite setting, the Chicago by Night setting. I think that's kind of because that's the first setting that I got into and the one where I started to really dig the characters. And of all of those, Modius, I think, is my favorite vampire. Um, because of the effect that he has on the area around him. And I know in like V5, I think they finally killed him. I think Juggler finally put an end to
Yeah.
Modius, which I find very sad because I loved Modius. But Modius and Loden's War in Chicago, to me, is one of the most compelling stories because it tells both the story of the decline of the steel industry in that area
Yep.
and also relates it to Modius, who is this vampire who at one point could have challenged ostensibly the princiest of princes. He was that powerful. He was that well respected, but his own decline, his own loss and just stranglehold at the hands of Loden has not only made him a weaker a weaker person, but it's made the area that he lives in weak and corrupted as well because it's just a reflection of his the lack of his humanity.
Right.
And
Right.
that I absolutely love that.
Yeah, I would 100% agree that Chicago is probably the most developed setting they've had. Like
Hmm.
bar
Hmm.
none. Even opposed to like Fall of London and Victorian era vampire, which was one of my favorite settings they did. One of my favorite splats they did was Victorian era vampire. But I think that Chicago, they really did their work. They did their time, and they
Yeah.
really fleshed out a very full setting. And it's one of the only settings that gets an update every time they release a new
Right.
edition. Chicago always gets a new book. And so I think that they really have a lot invested into Chicago and into what they're doing with Chicago. And I think that's super cool. I think it is super cool that they have found their place. Now, would I like them to give us updates on like Miami and New
Absolutely.
York and everything? Of course I would. I want the whole world fleshed out, not just for me as a storyteller of a setting that isn't fleshed out pretty much at all. Um,
Right.
but as a fan, because I want to know what Beckett's up to. I want to know, what is happening overseas. In Tokyo, they did the Tokyo stuff, and they did, I wasn't a big fan of Kindred of the East or Kindred of the Dark Continent, but I do want to know kind of that stuff, and I think that they
Hmm.
have a bevy of material they could release. I know they had originally announced that there was going to be a Miami by Night book, then it kind of disappeared. I really hope they do, because I just think that there is so much that they can do with that kind of material, all the material that came before. Did they make a lot of mistakes? Absolutely. There was a lot of stuff in the
Right.
older
Yeah.
editions that I'm like, glad that's not coming back. I'm glad we're not going to see,
Right.
some of the things they've done before. But there are plenty of things that I would like to see them follow up on and follow through on. And one of my biggest critiques of 5th edition, and I'd love to hear your thoughts about this, is that they have kind of really loosen the reins on the lore. Like, yes, they fleshed out Chicago. Yes, they fleshed out London and Fall of London. But as a whole, they're not answering a lot of questions. They're leaving a lot open, more than they ever did before. Of course, there's always been the rule of storytellers can do whatever they want and they can alter
Yep.
things however. But one of the things that Vampire and World of Darkness was good at was that they maintained a consistency of, like, if you have questions about stuff, we will give you answers, or we will at least give you the next piece of the answer that we're trying to tell. Like, they had a solid founded setting in mind, and you could do with it what you wanted to. Now in 5th edition, it seems like, well, it could be this, it could be that. Like, they never tell us what the beckoning
Yeah.
really is. They're
Right.
just like, or how it manifests. Like, Victoria Ash is running around as like a 6th or 7th generation Toreador, but then you've got like 9th or 10th generations of other clans who are just being pulled away with no explanation. No, they don't give you a yes, the antediluvians are doing this, or yes, the Methuselahs are doing this, or yes, Gehenna happened. They just will not tell you. And creatively, that's freeing, but as someone who is a lore junkie and has been, I'm like, no, just tell me what you want. Tell me
Yeah.
what you want to do. I
Yeah.
will make amazing stories out of it no matter what. Just tell me what the thing is, and we can
Right.
go from there.
That
Tell
was
me
something that
why.
you used to be able to look forward to back in 2nd edition when a new book came out, the meta plot advanced. Like that was something you could look forward to. You knew the meta plot up to a certain point. Now, you didn't necessarily know what was going to happen next, but you knew the reasons that the things happened.
Yes.
And occasionally they would throw in I don't want to say a retcon because they were really good in my opinion of making sure that they foreshadowed things in the meta plot for 2nd edition.
Yep.
But it really feels like once they got to the apocalypse, right? Once they got to, the Red Star is here.
Week of
The,
Nightmares.
the Week of Nightmares is happening. The Ravnos Antediluvian arises. That is where there was a really, really big change. And I remember there was the Week of Nightmares source book that came out, which had like 7 different endings
The
that you
Gehenna
could
book.
potentially
Yeah.
go with. Yeah. And it was like, well, no, I don't want 7 different endings. I want you to tell me this meta plot that I've been following for years. What's the end?
Yeah.
Like, What's the end
Wrap
game?
up the
How does
story.
this
Tell
work?
me.
Right.
Yeah.
Like, and that's something that frustrates me to no end, even beyond VTM. Like when I watch a movie or something and there's no definitive ending, oh, I get hot. I get hot so bad. Like
Ugh.
Inception. I wanted to throw something at the screen after Inception. Like,
There's a movie called Anatomy of a Fall, which is out right now, and it's nominated for all kinds of Oscars, and it's got, it's a foreign film, but it's getting all this acclaim. I hate that movie. I will just straight out say that, and it may be triggering to some people who've seen it because it doesn't tell you. It doesn't tell you what happened. It just is like, well, make up your
yeah.
own mind, I guess. And I'm like, no, that's
No,
not how
right.
storytelling works.
This is your
It's
story.
like,
You tell me the
you
end.
tell me, did they do it? Did they not do it? Like, what is the deal here? And I hate that about something that has been so constructed based around lore. Like, I felt like the lore has been the centerpiece, the pillar of what has made World of Darkness great, of what has made Vampire great, of what has made this system work, is that they did have a story they were telling, and then you told your stories around that pillar. And now that pillar seems like it's kind of crumbling, and I don't want that. Now, I understand you might have new writers. You don't have the old people who made the original story, and you kind of have to do a pivot, or, are trying to please too many people by, trying to give everyone what they want. It doesn't work that way. Do what you want to do. Take the story that's been told so far and take it whatever direction you want to take it. And maybe it'll go poorly, maybe it'll go well. That's the gamble of writing a story, is like, not everybody's going to like what you wrote, but
Right.
you are the ones in charge of that. You have inherited this project from the last 30 years. You now have to be the custodian of it, and you have to point it in the direction it's going to go, whether they like it or not. And I don't like that they're kind of hemming and hawing about that. I don't like their choice to reboot Werewolf and say, hey, all the canon of Werewolf is gone. We're starting over. That's fine. They said it, they did it, I stand by it. Even for the people who loved the old Werewolf canon, they did enough to kind of update it, but for the most part, they're saying, hey, we're starting over. Do that. Do that, and just stand by it. And the success and failure of the system and the game will depend on it, but also, it's a new generation of gamers. People are going to pick this up as their first exposure to World of Darkness, and that'll be what survives it. Don't worry about appeasing all the old school players. Just make a call and go forward with it, and then we will all adjust, or we won't.
Yeah, I feel like they're terrified to do that since VTR.
Yeah.
Because when they released VTR, there was huge backlash about the fact that it had nothing to do with the
I was
lore. And
part of that backlash.
I was one of those too, right? Yeah,
I
absolutely.
was very upset.
It's like, how dare you change my lore? What is this? The coils of the order cool. What? I don't understand any of this. I don't like it. I don't want it. Like, this is all awful. And I feel like they've been terrified to do something like that. And so now they're doing this sort of, in fifth edition, they're doing this sort of half measure thing where they're trying to see how far they can take the old second edition meta plot, how much they can change it without necessarily completely saying we're throwing it all out.
Right. And that, I think the big fumble with VTR is the same fumble that D&D made with 4th edition. There's this 4th edition curse, I swear, that all these systems are experiencing, where they're like, yeah, what's worked so far? Like, we're gonna just try and introduce something new. And I'm like, no, absolutely. Okay, fine. You want to try something new. Don't call it the thing it was.
Right.
Don't sell it as the thing it was. Say it's new, and it is going to be all new. New name, new branding, new everything. We are not going to try and con the people who loved this other thing into this new thing. Because 4th edition D&D is a perfectly fine system. It's not Dungeons and Dragons.
Okay.
So selling it as Dungeons and Dragons was where they screwed up.
Yeah.
because everyone had a preconceived notion of what Dungeons and Dragons was. Then they got 4th edition and were like, this is garbage. And the same thing happened with New WoD. That was the issue, is you
Right.
sold it to me as World of Darkness, but changed too much.
Yep.
You changed fundamental parts of what I associated with World of Darkness, and I will not stand that. I will
Yeah.
not abide that.
I think they made
So
a
yeah,
step in the right direction with Chronicles of Darkness, right?
yeah,
I don't know if you ever took a look at those books. Like they made a step in the right direction with that, where they did say, "Hey, this is new, this is different." I also think they, if you've never seen Monty Cook's World of Darkness,
I love
it
my. I
is,
have the book right over there.
yeah, it is a brilliant reimagining
Hmm.
of all of the horrible things that are in the World of Darkness and where they actually came from. And I recommend to anyone to take a look at that book and
Absolutely.
see what the World of Darkness could have been.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. And I
but
don't
that,
mind. I don't mind the
yep,
reimaginings, but be
right,
honest. Don't try and sell it to me as what we had. Like, tell us it's something new. We're trying
right,
something new. We're done. We wrapped up World of Darkness in our mind, even though it was terribly done with Gehenna. We're done. So now we're doing something new. Like, that's okay because I have the full knowledge of what I'm getting into, of do I want to give this a shot or do I want to just stick with what I like?
right.
And you're not trying to sell it to me as that as what I like. And so yeah, I mean that's the big thing. And then there's the 5th edition. We're going back to what worked in World of
Right,
Darkness and in
right.
D&D. We're going back to what people liked. We've changed a few things. We learned a lot from 4th edition, and we're taking a few things that we liked from it and incorporating those, but we're incorporating it in an overall mold that we know works. And I felt like they did that with 5th edition Vampire the Masquerade too. Like, I love the hunger dice mechanic and the
Oh,
desperation and the
absolutely.
rage and
Yes.
all. I love what they're doing because the old splats were never meant to cross over. They were
Right.
never meant to. And yet
I
with this
tried to do
new,
that once.
it's so hard. It's
It is
so difficult
impossible.
to do. Yeah, it's so difficult to do. But now I feel like it is possible. We're seeing
Right.
it happen in St. Pete. This was a huge gamble when we started this thing. We're going to see if we can make it cross splat. Let's bring in hunters. Here we go. And now with werewolves, like we're bringing in werewolves. Here we go. It seems balanced. And the system is the same across the board with a few adjustments as to how things are activated. But for the most part, the hunger, desperation, rage mechanic is
Yeah.
solid.
Yeah. A
And
super unpopular opinion. Hunger is way better than blood points ever were.
100%.
Okay.
100%.
Maybe it's not unpopular then.
No, I
But
love hunger.
yeah.
I
Yeah.
love because I have three. Okay. I'm going to go on a rant here, which I've
Sure,
already
sure,
been
sure.
doing.
Go for
I
it.
have
Go for
three
it.
simple philosophies when it comes to gaming: believability, playability, simplicity. Make those things happen, and you've got a good game, whatever you're experimenting with. And I learned this from a guy that I used to LARP with. He was the one who had this philosophy. It was great. Uh, but I believe the hunger mechanics really are believable in what they're trying to represent. That the
Mhm.
hungrier you get, the more danger comes with it, the more struggle comes with it. Whereas blood points felt like mana points, and I'm like,
Exactly.
but
Right.
vampires don't have mana. Like even
Right.
Tremere don't have mana. It comes from blood. And why do they have so many? And like it's all these things. Whereas with the hunger mechanics, there's a chance that you don't get hungrier, that you're
Mhm.
able to do the thing and not get hungrier, and there's a little bit more chaos thrown in with that. But it's also believable chaos, and it's simple. It's
Yes.
simple what they're trying to do, and it translates to the other systems really well. I love it. I absolutely love it, and I will stand by it. And I'm looking forward to what they're doing. So let's talk about the future of Worlds of Darkness, because I know
All
there's
right.
a few splats out there that people are hoping or waiting or crossing their fingers and toes. There was a great TikTok about all of the unused splats so far being like, when's it our turn? Uh, what do you think comes next?
It has to be mage. It
It
has
has
to be
to be
mage.
Mage.
And if I had my way, they would do Ascension, but I don't think they're going to do Ascension. I think they're going to do Awakening, and that's going to make me very sad because I'm very much a tied to the Ascension War and to the concept of the Ascension War and the battle for reality, and even how that played into the Tremere needing to become vampires in order to survive the Ascension War,
Right.
because that magic was literally being torn from them by the technocracy, and they needed to find another way to continue. These mages who had used magic to keep themselves young for, decades, centuries, and they were originally from Ars Magica.
Yep.
If and that system is super complicated. I've looked at it once and was like, nope,
Nope.
I'm gonna go back to my Tremere.
Yeah.
But yeah, that all played into it. So I really hope that they do Ascension, but I'm afraid it's gonna be Awakening.
Or it could be a mix of
Um,
the two. Like that's one thing that they've done is that they've really shaken up kind of how they're doing it, especially with resetting lores and stuff like that. Like it
yeah,
could be both.
I if- I think you might be able to fit the watchtowers in, but at that point you're like defining what reality is, and Ascension was all about not doing that. So I
Right.
don't know. I mean, literally at one point, if you read the Mage the Ascension lore, there was a mage who took over the entire planet Earth, and everybody forgot about it
Yep.
because I think it was Faraday who actually sacrificed his life. The Faraday, the scientist and technocrat who sacrificed his life in order to banish this guy into the ether. But yeah, and then everybody forgot that it happened because paradox. But it's Mage, at least Ascension, is absolutely wild. If you ever play in a Mage campaign, you start off basically homeless and trying to figure out where rent is going to come from the next month. And by the end of the campaign, you are fighting the god of death.
Yep.
So
So one thing that I've loved that they've done with fifth edition is that they did take an unexpected path. When they dropped Vampire and then immediately followed it up with Hunter, which I was surprised by because Hunter was not one of the big three. It was probably, in my
right.
mind, one of the less good systems in the older editions. It was one of the less believable systems in the older editions. I was very interested, and then I looked at it mechanically. And for all you mechanics nuts, you're probably going to completely tune out during this bit. But there's something about the rollout pattern they've been using where each system feels like a play test for the next system.
Yeah.
Looking at Werewolf was a great setup for Hunter because what they've done with 5th edition is they've made the humans the BBEG. The humans are the scariest thing to all of the supernaturals. Humans are the biggest danger.
Right.
Hunter's mechanics were definitely trying some things for Werewolf. And that now, me being, a primarily werewolf storyteller now on this server, I am looking at the werewolf mechanics and I'm like, holy shit, they're auditioning mage. They're trying mage with the gifts and rights system,
Mhm.
with how they're, executing it. They're basically play testing what mage is going to be. So I 100% agree with you that mage is next. I have no
Yeah.
doubt, especially of the major releases. Haha, no pun intended. Mage has to be next. I wouldn't be surprised if we saw another unusual splat dropped in like Wraith or something like that
Oh,
in the interim. I could see it. I could see it. But I believe the next big one is going to be Mage for sure. No question about it. I'm not sure about Changeling, which I know is an unpopular opinion. I'm not sure how Changeling is going to work in this all. I always thought Changeling was kind of a out of left field from what I understood the World of Darkness to be. I always felt the World of Darkness was very grounded and gritty, and then Changeling, I was like, okay. Um, but I'm not saying no, and I'm not saying I wouldn't incorporate it if it did come in. I just it felt like very, very a grab to something kind of distant. But I'd like to. I'm interested, and I do like the way they're going about it because it does feel like everything is a setup for what's next. It's readying the player base for what's next. It's like, okay, you've played Vampire. since 2019 or whatever. Now you've played Hunter or you've looked at Hunter, which got you ready for Werewolf. You're going to get comfortable with the Werewolf mechanics, and then we'll just sprinkle in some new things with Mage. Like, they've been very careful about the rollout, which in the old splats, they'd be like, here's something completely wild and different. Like, here,
Right,
we're throwing
right.
a book at you that is completely different than what you learned. Whiplash to the nth degree.
Yes.
And now it feels very comfortable. The transitions feel comfortable. I thought I was going to be in for a steep learning curve with Hunter. And while there was some of that, for the most part, it was a pretty solid, there a lot of the essence of it came from Vampire. Same with Werewolf. I thought Werewolf was going to be a big whiplash because of old Werewolf. It's not. It's very much with the rage mechanic, the hunger mechanic. It wasn't that much to wrap my head around. And so I'm very excited to see what they keep doing and what they keep releasing. And I hope that they have a plan. It seems like they do, but you never can be sure.
Right, right,
You look at the old World of Darkness, it's like we thought they had a plan then too, and then we met
right.
Samuel Haight. Um,
Oh man,
so
chaos factor.
we don't know, but here it does seem like they have a plan. It does seem like they have a rollout schedule. There are some things that I'm like, okay, like the Bloodstained Love book, which I am actually becoming more fond of, to be completely honest, as I'm rereading it and looking over it again
Yeah,
through a fresh perspective. I like the little, like, we're just enhancing what we've already got. We're adding, like, that's one thing I liked about Chronicles of Darkness, is that they did have, like, hey, here's another extra piece that you could add in. Here's another, here's some other elements to enhance your game. You can use them or not. We don't really care. I like that they're doing that. But yeah, I do feel like they have a plan, and I'm really really hoping that's the case.
yeah.
Uh,
To
so
go
we'll
to go
see.
back to Changeling, honestly, the standout for Changeling for me is that I think it is the darkest of the old games. And this is coming from someone who thought Wraith was awesome,
Oh,
but
absolutely.
Changeling doesn't have hope. Like, you are a creature who is stuck between either a state of madness or a state of madness. And
Yeah.
that it's just multiple, or a state of absolute forgetful depression of what you were. It is the worst of all of the splats, and I don't know why it attracts some folks who are very sparkly, because I feel like underneath all those sparkles is just a morass of tar.
Yes. So I could and have spoken at great length with you about systems, and this could be a
Oh,
multi-episode thing about systems. But let's
sure.
talk back. Let's steer back to St. Pete a little bit. So you've been a part of the community. You played with Ian. The revamp came, and you just became so invested and so embedded, like Ian, into our server that I don't know what we'd do without you. I don't,
Oh,
and
thank
that's
you.
not me just blowing smoke up your ass. Like, that's legitimately, you are a core piece of what makes this game work and has made it so much better than I ever imagined it to be. And that's through some of your webmaster wizardry as well as your vast lexicon of knowledge. Talk me through, because you do web stuff and kind of programming and coding and that kind of stuff as is. Talk me through kind of the out of game aspect of that, what you do for a living,
Sure.
and then what enticed you to bring it, all those skills and all those services to the game, because you took being a player to the nth degree now, and now you are a fundamental part of our team. So where's your experience in terms of web coding and webmastering? And then why did you decide to contribute that to St. Pete?
Sure. So many, many years ago, I was on a help desk, and I was doing phone support for overnight restaurants, 24/7 restaurants. So I was doing phone support for them. And I decided that I did not want to work third shift for the rest of my life, because third shift and I were not really compatible.
Right.
Second shift and I get along a lot better. First shift and I don't get along either, but I had to deal with that. Um, And so I kind of sat down, and it was back in the 90s. This was, like the web is a thing and it's just now becoming popular. And I was like, okay, well, I guess I could start teaching myself, how to make web pages. And that's really where it all started. And I ended up with a series of bosses, one in particular who stood out, who I would come to him with ideas about, hey, I think I can make the help desk better by creating this tool that is on a website. And then when someone calls in, they just click on the pictures to get drilled down to the thing that's broken, and then they can see exactly what they need to do to fix the thing that's broken. Um, and he was like, "Okay, cool." And I was like, "Yeah, we should like really pay someone to come in here and do this." And he was like, "Well, I'm paying you. Why don't you just stop taking calls and do this?" And I was like, I don't know how to do any of this. What are you talking about?"
What?
And at the time, the cost of paying a web developer was way more than the cost of paying a guy answering the phones. And so he actually took me off the phones and was like, "No, you figure it out. You say that this can happen, which means you at least know something about how it works." And I was like, "Okay, I will try to figure it out." And I started to build processes and procedures into a website and basically a content management system, and kind of stumbled my way through learning databases. And I went through Perl and PHP as programming languages and finally settled on Python. Uh, and then ended up moving into systems engineering and software engineering as a career. Ended up leaving third shift, going to first shift, and building systems, and I kind of haven't looked back since. And something similar pretty much happened with St. Pete, because I got started getting involved, and I was like, "Huh, St. Pete have a website?" And so I put St. Pete by Night into Google, and I was like, "St. Pete doesn't have a website. That's weird." So I go over to check the DNS registries, and I'm like, "St. Pete registered? St. Pete's not registered. Well, that's weird. Oh, well, that means it's not registered. There's no website. I'm just going to build a website." Like, I was like, whatever, I'm going to go ahead and register this. And, I'd been squatting on some other domains. I say squatting because they were ideas that I had that I wanted to build. And the biggest one of them was a website where I could have players of tabletop games come to meet other players of tabletop games and figure out when they were going to schedule themselves and have these games on Discord. So there was this whole like confluence of this idea in my head, and the fact that St. Pete was missing a website, which really I thought they might need for something like this, or I thought y'all might need for something like this. And I was just like, I am gonna build it, and I'm not gonna wait for someone to give me permission to do it, because I'm always an ask forgiveness kind of person. Um, And so then one day I sent you the link, and I was like, "Well, here you go. Like, I've done this, and here's the website." And your reaction was the best I could have hoped for. And I was super excited about it. And that just really jazzed me up into doing the other stuff. I was like, okay, so I want to build a Discord bot that can do all these things, that can roll dice, that can track characters. I want to build this web out where you can actually go and see, how your character is related to other characters in the game, and you can drill down onto the characters and get like little bios about them. I want to have pictures of all the characters. I've got this huge plan in my head, and I don't have enough time to actually put it in the keyboard. But
Yet. You're
yes,
still making
right.
magic happen, so I'm never underestimating you. Um, this is gonna seem like an odd question. Why us? What was it about us? Like, you have so many projects, so much on your plate. And I'm not looking for you to compliment us or anything like that. I mean, we didn't know how much we needed this stuff until we got it, honestly. Now it's made life so great. But why? What was it about this community, this group, this game that made you stick around? Because this is unusual, and we did say, we're bringing this to an end. We're revamping it. which is why it's called Revamped now. Like, what was it about this specific project that really called to you creatively and made you want to invest so much time and effort? Because we appreciate it, and I'm never letting you go. But what something had to have inspired you to want to do it and to invest more time and more effort, and especially your precious free time, into doing this.
Yeah, it was honestly seeing all the work that the storytellers and the mods were putting in, and all of the effort that y'all were doing to keep the game running for everyone. And I was like, What can I do to give back? What can I do to provide something for y'all in order to make this game easier to manage, in order to, popularize it, in order to do whatever? Just what skills do I have that I can give back with? That y'all's dedication, honestly, is really what made me think this is something that I can put my time into, because it's not just going to vanish. And even when the revamp was happening, like, I was 100% certain it's not just going to go away. And so this is definitely something that I wanted to put my skills into in order to give back for everything that y'all have done.
No, I'm locked in for life. This is basically my living now, my life. It doesn't pay like a living, but it's I'm fortunate enough to be able to do it as a living. So I do want to say that if anybody hasn't had a chance to check out stpbynight.com, head on over there and take a look. It's constantly changing, constantly evolving. It's got a link straight to our Twitch right on the homepage with our schedule so that you can stream the streams that are coming up. You can keep up to date with all of the activities that St. Pete by Night is. And then there's just all of the cool added bonuses and extras that have come into being. If there's anything that I've learned about Kyrie, he is a very much bet or hold my beer kind of guy. So one of the biggest kind of things that was just this would be cool. We were doing the revamp. We knew we were separating into groups. We knew it wasn't going to have the same LARP-esque feel, but we wanted people to feel invested into this setting. And so the idea was floated out there, like, what if we could do some sort of gauge or meter that would say and show the impact of the players on the overall setting, that everything didn't feel like a row of bottles, that everybody had their own bottle that they were in, and that those bottles never crossed over. So the idea was floated for a threat meter, and I swear it wasn't more than 72 hours later that you came back to me with, like, well, here's a prototype of our threat meter. Like, here's what I'm thinking. What do you think of this? And it has, just like everything else you've done, evolved over time to be this live updated feed of events that are occurring from sessions, of meters that are constantly raising and lowering. And you brought in we brought in the Greater Camarilla, the FBI, the Florida State Police, Pentex, the Sabbat, and the Second Inquisition. And there's even requests out there for an owl meter, which I don't think you just have to have the circle constantly going.
I can have that one update randomly.
And filling just randomly. But it has been such a cool kind of addition to the overall setting and game, and it has brought this new life into the setting, and it's because of you. Like, it really was just a random idea that the staff had that we had kind of ruminated on, and it was just kind of like, in an ideal world, it'd be cool if we had this, and you were able to make it happen. How? What? I'm not asking for the technical talk because I won't understand it, but, like, how did you learn to do these kinds of things? How did you become capable of doing these kinds of things?
Honestly, it is, and I get asked this a lot. It is a lot of failure that got me here. And that's one thing that, if I could emphasize to anyone, do not be afraid to try something new and fail. Because when I was on that help desk, I had no idea what I was doing, and I failed awfully and badly. But at least I had a boss at the time who was willing to accept my failures and say, "Hey, keep working through this." I mean, I now understand that, hey, he was getting a massive deal, by basically getting less than an intern price for someone but he was also losing a head count in what he needed to accomplish. So don't be afraid to fail. Don't be afraid to try something new. Don't be afraid to just go out there on the internet and just learn from what's out there. Like that's one of the greatest things about the internet is that there is the sum total of human knowledge out there at your fingertips. There are courses that you can take. There are so many different, like if you're interested in doing website stuff, there's so many different free software engineering courses that you can take. Even if it's just learning a little bit of scripting, you'll learn that you can apply that to your daily life if there's something that is a repetitive task you can do. Like use the internet, use those tools, and don't be afraid to make mistakes.
Yeah, absolutely. And another feature that you've added is the dice bot. Now, when we first started the server, we knew not everybody's going to have the number of d10s required or the separation between hunger dice and regular dice. So I had managed to hunt down and find something called Realm of Darkness, which was a pretty simplistic dice bot. And then, again, like the wizard that you are, you said, I can make this better. And took it and somehow not only cloned it, but did add a bunch of incredible features. And for those who are struggling with the dice bot, Kyrie has even taken it a step further and added a section on the website where you can find how to do all the different commands required to successfully operate the dice bot. And it is, again, one of the coolest additions, one of the most unique additions that we have within the game. What motivated you to try this? What motivated you to do this as well? Because it's a big undertaking. It's not a simple thing.
Right. So I'd never built a Discord app before, and I had no idea what it would take to build a Discord app. But I was like, you know what? I use Discord all the time. Why don't I understand how to make one of these? Why don't I know how this works? And then the fact that St. Pete needed a dice bot, or I shouldn't say needed a dice bot because there was the Realm of Darkness one, but there were features in the Realm of Darkness one that only existed if you subscribe to their Patreon. And I was like, well, I want to be able to provide those kind of features, like the character tracking features, to everyone who's on the St. Pete server without them having to subscribe to the Patreon. And so I want to build that dice bot and not only get the experience of building the dice bot, not only get the experience of working with Discord, but also be able to provide a feature to the community again, and something that everyone would use. Because honestly, I get a lot of dopamine from building things that people use. Like,
and it is used.
Just,
I mean, some tables are dice bot only for transparency's sake, for other things, and we've had several people try to ask how they can get their own, and I want to address those people directly. You can't. Find your own. Find your own guy to do this, because whatever offer you make Kyrie, I will match or double. So come at me, bro. You're not taking him away. I have locked that down.
I also want to dispel the rumor that there is any dev doors that could get you extra critical successes. If anything, the DiceBot hates its creator more than anyone else, and it likes to watch me fail. It likes to have me put in, I've got 8 dice to make a roll, and it's like total failure. Ha ha ha.
But it's cool. I like it because it does add an element of chaos, but it also levels the playing field. I've never been one of those people who's super superstitious about dice, that, some dice are good, some dice are bad. I'm like, they're all dice. Like, you roll them, whatever happens, happens. It's a randomity thing. It's always been a randomity thing. But I've also heard that, like, you roll them enough, they're going to, like, wear down on certain edges, and that's going to affect the way that, whatever. Fine. But with the dice bot, it is a level playing field. Everyone is getting the same odds. Everyone is getting the same thing. It saves money, even though, please go sponsor our dice vendors. They're amazing. It does level the playing field, and it does add a certain amount of transparency to the game. And I love how hungry the dice bot is. Like, failure is one of the best parts of TTRPGs to me, and I will stand by that. critical failures, messy criticals, bestial failures, all these things are some of what makes the games fun. If you are
Right.
winning all the time, you are doing a disservice to yourself, to your character, and to the story. Failure is what makes it even better when you overcome it, even better when you do succeed and when you do win. Like, it's so great. And a creative storyteller can take you through any amount of failure and keep the game going. They can keep the
Not only
story
that,
going.
but when you're in a coterie game, failure for your character is a platform for success for someone else's. And that story in and of itself could be absolutely amazing.
So great. So great. It is what makes the game worth playing. It is what makes it have stakes, have odds, like the stress, the sweating, going for that final roll that it's like life or death, and you
Hmm.
do it and you
Hmm.
win. Holy, there's no better adrenaline rush. There's no better high than getting that win after losing time and time again. And you just miss out. And for players who fudge dice rolls, not storytellers are allowed to fudge dice rolls. I will stand by storytellers' ability to fudge dice rolls to tell a good story. But for players who are fudging dice rolls, you're doing yourself a disservice. You really are. Like, just let the odds be what they are. Take the loss and bounce back from it. Like, it's so good when it happens. And I like that the dice bot allows us to do that and allows us to have that opportunity. And I do think that you gotta go with it. And yeah, there are mechanics like willpower, as Urabos says in the chat. Uh, you know, those are great. Yes, it gives you an out and another
Yeah,
opportunity, but
absolutely.
like it's still, there's no beating the success after countless failures. Like, it's so good. So the last thing I want to touch on tonight before I let you go back to your incredibly busy and incredibly magical existence, you are in a game that is going to be debuting tomorrow night, known as Bloody Strings. It is a Vampire the Masquerade 5th Edition Chronicle set in St. Pete, run by our very own Bearer the Bard, professional storyteller slash game master Bearer the Bard. The first episode is going live tomorrow night at 8 p.m. Eastern. Talk me through your character, Gray Novak, and through, your coterie and the story without giving out too much, because that is a
Okay.
recorded game, so you're months ahead of where everyone else is. But kind of talk about what it was like bringing that table together. What's it been like playing with Bera, and what, the chemistry at the table is really good. I've gotten to sit in on some sessions and guest on some sessions. What's it been like, and what was some of the motivation behind building Gray?
Yeah. So first off, the table chemistry I think is amazing. Truck is awesome. I love having him at the table. The car, awesome. Love having him at the table. And I have to, by law, say that I love having Nori at the table. No, I'm kidding. She's amazing as well, and I always love playing in the games that she's in. Um, and I was concerned because I didn't know really how we would gel, because I had several scenes with Truck previously, but I hadn't had a whole lot of scenes with Car. I know that Nori had had some scenes with the car, but I know she hadn't had a whole lot of scenes with Truck. And so it was interesting. I was kind of nervous about how he would gel, but we hit it off so quickly and so easily, and just kind of found our groove. And Bera, I think, is really, really a huge factor, huge component in that. Like, I am exceedingly picky when it comes to giving out praise to storytellers, because I'm very picky about myself. And so I end up being picky towards other storytellers as well. And Bara is one of those who knows how to push all the buttons that make me have a good time. And I love being at his table. I love the way that he weaves these really intricate plots and only gives you the lens that your character can see through. And that lens shifts every session as you learn a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more, and you start to understand where the strings, the bloody strings, are being pulled from. And I absolutely encourage everybody to give it a watch. I have a great time playing. As far as Gray, he is basically everything Ian was not. He is self-centered. He is about himself and only himself. He is very much not interested in building a community, more interested in having the adoration of a community. So he's got big ambitions, but I don't know that he's ever going to be able to fulfill them. And playing him is a whole lot of fun, especially playing him opposite the straight guy, which Truck plays, which is really great to have that banter go back and forth between us. Um,
Well, and one thing I love about all of your characters is there's always something beneath the surface. And Gray has a very, very, very dangerous secret that he is attempting to keep as best as humanly possible, despite running into
vampirically
several
possible.
as
Vampirically possible.
vampirically possible. Despite many obstacles that are causing it to be almost like stumbling points. And I think that's one of another cool thing about you as a role player, as a character builder, as someone who fleshes it out, is that you always challenge yourself more than I feel like any storyteller could ever challenge you. Like you take hard mode from your storyteller and are like, yeah, and then add another layer to it of hard mode on top of it, like extra difficulty. And I think that is so cool. And having been aware of the storyline even before there was a group, having been consulting with Barra throughout the storyline, it's just been so cool to see the Bloody Strings story unfold. They finished their first story already. You are already on to your second story, and now people are getting to kind of go back and witness publicly the first story. And I can tell you, it is a hell of a ride. Like, the first story is absolutely a hell of a ride, and everyone is going to enjoy that. So that's Bloody Strings tomorrow at 8 p.m. right here on the St. Pete Twitch channel. Tune in for that and witness their adventures, and they'll be airing weekly on Sundays at 8 p.m. so you can see it on the schedule. It will become a regular part of our lineup. What is something that you would tell people to look out for or be particularly watchful of if they do tune, or when they do? I'm not going to say if. Everyone's going to
Okay.
tune into it. When they tune into Bloody Strings, what is something that you would tell them to like keep an eye out for?
I would say that not everything is as it appears, even on the screens of the players, not just in the story. So keep an eye out for that.
Yeah, also, as a future milestone to be unveiled, our own Kyrie is going to take a turn at potentially storytelling for the storytellers in a small kind of multi-step arc uh, involving the Uncle Fang's gang of Thin Bloods. We can't announce exactly when that's going to be coming out, but it is going to be coming out. So if you're not following or subscribing, help us reach our unnamed milestone of making that happen, because that is going to be very, very cool. I'm glad that you're getting to enjoy being a player, and I would never deprive that of you as a forever storyteller myself. But I do love the idea of you taking the reins of storyteller, because I've just loved having you as a player, and I know with your vast history similar to my own, it's going to be a lot of fun to be a part of that. Is there any potential sneak peeks you'd like to give of that when it does occur? Anything you can think
Um,
of offhand right now?
sure. I think I could. There is a community of Thin Bloods that is been hiding in the shadows of several of the Camaria cities in Florida, and that community is under threat, and they need to figure out how to protect themselves because there's nobody else they can rely on.
I love it. I'm so excited. I'm so excited. So if you know anybody who isn't following this channel or isn't subscribed to this channel, even if they hate Vampire, doesn't matter. Get them to follow it anyway. They don't even have to tune in. We want to reach that follower cap so that we can make this multi-shot. I wouldn't even call it a one-shot. I'd call it a multi-shot. This
worst at
small
one-shots.
chronicle. Me too. I hate it. It's not feasible. But yeah, to make this happen, we would love to have you help us reach that goal. So just go give us a follow. Also, while you're talking about it, follow all our social media, which is listed down at the bottom of the screen there. We're available on Instagram, TikTok, Discord. We're all over the place. You can catch up on old episodes on YouTube, and those Bloody Strings episodes will be posted to YouTube too, so don't stress if you aren't able to make the live broadcast. You can go ahead and catch up on those as they air. They usually get posted to YouTube about 5 days after they happen. So tomorrow night, Bloody Strings. Then on Tuesday, we are going to head across the bay to Tampa to see what the werewolves are up to in Rage Across Tampa. Next Thursday, we've got the return of Don't Get Caught, which is our Anarch coterie up in, Tarpon Springs and Sebastian's domain, although they did have a recent guest spot from Kyrie reprising his role of Ian Farrow a couple of weeks ago. And just, get caught up on all the things that are happening on St. Pete. And if you're a fan of World of Darkness, if you're a fan of Vampire Hunter or Werewolf, come join our community at Discord. It's, I believe, discord.gg/St. By Night, but it is linked on Twitch, on YouTube, all the places we are. You can find the links there, and you can join our community. Kyrie, any final thoughts? Anything you'd like to just say to the people? Anything you'd like to say in general before we put a bow on this thing?
Yeah, if y'all have any suggestions or any ideas for any changes or enhancements to the dice spot or anything y'all want to see on the website, even if you think it's wild and you're not sure if it can happen, send it in. I would love to see it, and I would love to start going through some ideas, prioritizing them, and getting them built into both the dice spot and the website. So any wild idea you've got, please send it along.
Yeah, and absolutely. You can either DM any myself or Kyrie. You can email webmaster at stpbnight.com.
stpbnight.com. Yep.
And get it to Kyrie directly. Obviously, the staff are going to have to weigh in if it's something we're going to allow in the game. So an auto win button or anything like that, you can put that out of your head immediately. We're not going to let him do that. But yeah, we are a constantly evolving community, and we always appreciate input from our players. We always appreciate input from our staff. Our DMs are always open, and we're trying to make this place fun. We're trying to make this place enjoyable for everyone, even those who haven't gotten the opportunity to be seated at tables yet, with the hopes that they can be one day. So, just help us make this community better for everyone, and we always appreciate input. So, Kyrie, I can't thank you enough. I absolutely know we're going to do a part 2. There are so many questions left that are unanswered for me, and I'm going to try my best not to bombard you with them on my own just because I can, so that I could save them for an episode, because I know if I want to know, I'm almost certain the people want to know. But thank you for everything you do. I can't say that enough. From the bottom of my undead heart, I appreciate you more than I can say. Anybody who's looking at stealing Kyrie away from me, don't even think about it. I can fly to where you live and make that not a thing. But yes, we really appreciate you so much for what you do. Oh, and because Hugo brought it up, our next After Dark is next Saturday at the same time, 9 p.m. Eastern, where we will be talking to Mimic the Storyteller. We'll be diving into the wonderful chaotic brain that is our own Bomb Clancy, Mimic for Hire, Sire for Hire. So that's what is going to be our next After Dark. But yeah, Kyrie, you're the best. Honestly, I adore you more than I can say. And I will always give you a place to experiment and try things as long as you are willing to do so. And yeah, so thank you all so much for tuning in for tonight's After Dark. Stay tuned. We've got lots of amazing content. You can catch up on all the old content, but this is a train that's just going to keep rolling, and we're going to keep bringing entertainment to you. We're going to keep bringing opportunities to you, and we're going to help increase your love of all things St. Pete and the world of darkness, because we're going to make sure you're as obsessed as we are. Anyway, have a good night, everyone. Enjoy yourselves, and we'll see you next time.
Good night, y'all.